Wesco International stands atop MDM's top electrical, data, and security products distributors list via its more than $22 billion in annual revenue. To get there, the Pittsburgh headquartered company underwent one of the biggest transformations we've seen from a major distributor over the past decade. Wesco's $4.5 billion acquisition of Annixter International in mid-2020 was a landmark transaction in the electrical supply space, combining two distributors that each had about $8 billion in revenue at that point. So it essentially doubled the size of Wesco and led to a multi-year integration project. Along the way, the company has enacted various digital, business model, and talent innovations to continue transforming the company. All of this activity was recently analyzed in a 3-part article series and subsequent case study report by John Gunderson, who writes and speaks on the B2B distribution channel. He previously spent 20 years at several different distributors in the roles of marketing, sales, and category management, including 2.5 years at Annixter. John also spent 3 years as MDM's VP of Analytics and E-Business. I'm Mike Hockett, MDM's Executive Editor, and in this episode of the MDM Podcast, John and I discussed his Wesco analysis series and case study to get his top takeaways from the process. You'll want to stay tuned for more case studies from John on MDM, including previous ones on Fastenal and Ferguson, with more to come. We recorded this episode a week before MDM kicks off our 3rd annual Shift Conference, which John will also attend. As a special offer for any late registrants, you can use the code MDM Podcast to get 10% off of your Shift registration. With that, enjoy the episode. John, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Mike.
John, this Wesco analysis and case study had to be particularly interesting for you to dive into, given that you were at Annixter International from 2014 to 2017. And of course, Annixter was then acquired by Wesco in 2020 for $4.5 billion, essentially doubling the size of Wesco from going from an $8 billion revenue distributor to $16 billion at that point. And that figure has since grown to $22.4 billion in fiscal 2023. So as you touch on in this series and in this case study, you had some insight into the markets that Wesco is currently serving. Your career has also included stints at fellow electrical distributors Crescent Electric and EIS. So how did all of that experience help you or steer you in your research into Wesco?
Yeah, Mike, thanks for the intro. And the way I really looked at it was they're attacking their markets in a very interesting 1, 2, 3 approach. So they've got what I call really good business segmentation between their divisions and their go-to-market, who they serve. And, for me, it was just a lot of fun because, spending 20 years in the space and almost all of it in electrical, and being the integrator of the Annixter and HD supply deal that was done, it really gave me an insight into how they've grown. But they have grown, as you said, from one of the biggest to the biggest in North America.
Yeah.
And they have absorbed and integrated Annixter really effectively. And I think that really comes through in the series.
Any decent size acquisition for a distributor is going to take a fair amount of time to get integrated, but this was, like we said, doubling the size of the business then. So this was a multi-year integration process that was very interesting to see how that played out, over the last, like we said, it closed in mid-2020, but I don't think it was until around 2023, maybe even early 2024, that Wesco considered Annixter fully integrated. So it definitely took some time, and everything that we can tell, they did it right along the whole way.
Yeah, Mike, they have just really stopped, I guess is the proper term, talking about the integration very recently. So they had a very, what I would call, solid plan on how to integrate a business that big over 2 years. And they met all their synergy goals that they put towards, the street. So all their synergy goals for the acquisition, they met. So they obviously did it, what I would call, step by step, and they did it very effectively.
Well, the first part of your Wesco article series dove into Wesco's scale and value proposition, really illustrating the three different market segments that the company targets and serves. And those three segments are electrical and electronic solutions, utility and broadband solutions, and communications and security solutions. And while there is a little overlap between those three, they really are each their own market with specific customers to each. So, what were your key takeaways from examining Wesco's scale and value proposition?
Yeah, it's very interesting that the business is balanced between the three groups. What they call electrical and electronic solutions, they call EES. A lot of distributors in the space would refer to that as construction and industrial, C&I. So that business that serves that electrical contractor and the industrial end users is very specific. How you go to market, how you win, who you serve, how important the manufacturer reps are. It's really its own channel inside electrical.
Yeah.
Then the second group they have is utility and broadband solutions. And that, of course, serves the utilities. Well, there's only 2,300 utilities in the United States. That includes the public traded utilities and the local RECs and municipals. And there's also a small number of broadband type, what I would call end users in the market, the Comcast. So that is a very focused market, a completely different channel with different reps, different end users, and they're very different in the way they buy. I mean, Mike, for example, Florida Power in Florida buys so much of their material direct from the manufacturer. It does not come through the distributor, but the distributor oftentimes will manage that material, manage their yards. So it's a unique business where you're selling products, but you're also handling products that the end customer buys. And Wesco is really good at that. They're the number one in the space. And the last group is the communications and security solutions. That is what used to be called datacom and obviously security cameras. That itself is its own channel with its own different dynamics. And what I think is really interesting about how Wesco's positioned it and the way they attack it, where there's synergies between those businesses, they can have one team serve it. So, for example, accounts payables, account receivables, getting money, handling digital transactions, that probably can be run by one team across all three divisions. But the sales side cannot, because they're different skill sets and different markets with different end customers. So I think it's really, we dive into that a lot in the series, don't we, Mike, where we go into real detail of how they serve each market. And I think they do a good job of that. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, and I like how your case study segmented out those three different parts, because really it's almost like three different distributors under the same company umbrella in there. And like you said, it's because those channels are so different. There are some electrical distributors that don't touch utilities, and there's some that only touch utilities. So Wesco is doing kind of all the above, but like you said, they have to do it with these somewhat siloed channels that certainly integrate across the business. But there's definitely some staffing resources that makes sense to keep in one channel than try to have everyone serve everyone.
Yeah, Mike, just to add on, I mean, they're arguably the largest or the 1A in each of those groups, right? So they have size and scale across all three groups, coast to coast, into Canada, down into Mexico.
Mm-hmm. And then one of the biggest M&A items in industrial distribution of 2024 so far has been Wesco selling its integrated supply unit for $350 million to Valen. And that unit was Wesco's primarily industrial MRO offering. So to me, that move really seemed to signal that Wesco is hyper-focusing its efforts on what it does best in its core categories of electrical, data, and security products. Just any other thoughts on that divestment that I know you note during the case study series?
Yeah, I mean that group used to sit under what they call the utility and broadband solutions for Wesco, called UBS. Really, it is a integrated supply business, as you noted. And integrated supply is really its own business. You and I could have a podcast for about 2 hours on
Sure.
how integrated supply works and how it's different, but it's really its own business. So I view it as a fourth silo to their business. EES is one silo, UBS is one silo, and CSS is a third. Integrated supply was a fourth, and it probably doesn't fit in. It really, maybe this is a good way to look at it. Now you got to concentrate on four different business types versus three.
Yeah.
Why not concentrate on three and get really good at the three you're dominant in? That's the way I view it.
Yeah, in the communication that they had alongside that divestment, they mentioned that they liked that integrated supply unit. It was a well-performing business. But like you said, it was just out of those, four, it was definitely the one that was the most different and not kind of directly aligned with its core electrical customers. So it makes sense what they did there. And it'll be interesting to see how that boosts Valen and what they're doing. But yeah, it was a divestment that made sense for what Wesco is trying to do here. Yeah.
Yep.
So the second part of your series focused on Wesco's team and its what it calls its culture of excellence that the company continues to mention. And I think a lot of different distributor profiles and case studies tend to overlook the people and the talent component of these businesses. Distributors always talk about how they are only as strong as the quality of their staff, but that can still get overlooked amid all of the other technology innovation that these companies are up to. Your series did a great job of spotlighting that people element of Wesco. So can you walk me through the team and the culture element that your Wesco series covered?
Yeah, Mike, this was a fun part for me because a lot of times people who don't understand complex distribution, they'll, give lip service to the our people make the difference.
Yeah.
If you're an MRO distributor, your people are really important. But the reality of it is you are selling, let's just say, a can of oil, right? There isn't a lot of technical resources necessary to sell that, right? As long as the customer understands what they're buying, they can buy it and use it effectively. It's not to say those people aren't important in those roles, but in the businesses that Wesco serves, it's really highly technical. So, I've been in electrical. If you're trying to look at blueprints and do a takeoff for the electrical gear inside a building and do a bill of materials to do a bid on, you have to have a lot of knowledge, right? Because electrical is a very dangerous product, right? If you don't handle it, install it right, you can burn down buildings and you can have people get killed from not doing it and installing it properly. So it's highly technical. It's not something you can digitize. It's something you have to have really strong employees with experience and constant training. The same holds true for their utility and broadband business, Mike. Think about, everybody knows you can't touch high voltage equipment out there, the substation, all the towers, right? That is incredibly technical. You've got to understand what you're doing. And the same holds true for communications. If you've ever seen a picture of a data center, do you think that can be installed without people selling product that they know what it does? So Wesco is in three highly technical, highly human, old school distribution markets. And because of that, they really want to keep and attract the top talent. So they are constantly messaging their team about it is all about the people. How can we invest in them? How can we help you grow? I think they do a really good job there. They understand that they truly do have a business that is all about their people.
Yeah, with those markets that they're in, like you said, it's not like you can just take, kids freshly out of college that don't have that technical background and throw them into these installation, repair, engineering kind of services that Wesco offers. So it does take, some in-house training, and it sometimes it takes years of that. So they're definitely focused on attracting the top talent and retaining the ones that they have. So
Yeah,
yeah, it makes sense
Mike.
that they're putting such a priority on that.
Yeah, Mike, I would just add one story to that. When I first got in this business, there was a guy named Tom DeVries who was teaching me how to do lighting and gear takeoffs, right? He sat side by side with me for 2 years before he deemed that I knew what I was doing.
Hmm.
So that's the kind of technical knowledge that is required to serve the businesses they serve. So they've got to get people in and give them a tremendous amount of hands-on training in order to get them trained up enough to properly serve their customer base.
Yeah. The third part of your Wesco series focused on the company's digitization and digital transformation. In late July, I was able to interview Wesco Chief Information Officer and Chief Digital Officer Akash Khurana here on the podcast, where he shared a lot of great insight into the company's perspective into a few different digital initiatives. And that included AI. He gave a nice recap of the challenges involved with integrating Annixter into the business in the 4 years since that deal closed. So when you looked at all the digital front and efforts that Wesco is making, what were your top takeaways from this part of the story?
Mike, I loved your podcast with Akash. I thought it was great. I think everybody should listen to it. And I think it gives a lot of insight into what they're trying to do. My top takeaways were Wesco understands how to build digital in a way that supports their great human assets. So they're working on what can I digitize up to the point of an order that then can be given to our people to finish the order. So, I mean, I'll give you an example. They're making it easy for the customer to do all the pre-research on the product, the size, the type, the specifications, making that easy so they can do, the end customer can do a portion of each order self-serve and get it to a point where it's handed off to their team where they're not touching it. So they do a wonderful job of what are they doing to put out there that the end customer will do self-service themselves digitally, but then how that gets handed off to the team for the full service order. So I just think they're really investing smartly there, as many distributors are. But I think Wesco really conveys that message and is doing a really good job of that. And I think you really highlighted that in your podcast.
Sure. So those were the three key pillars of this Wesco case study, which again is available in the MDM store. And we've only scratched the surface here of the depth that that report and that series goes into. So when you put all of it together, what do you surmise as the biggest things Wesco is doing right to make customers choose them over some of the other competitors out there, whether it's other nationals or at the local level?
Yeah, Mike, I think that's a great thought. I think they have scale. They have coast to coast scale with strong distribution centers supporting local branches. Since a lot of their work is done in construction, they are a branch-based distributor where you've got to have people and product near the end customer because they oftentimes need that product today, not the next day. So I think they do a really good job of leveraging their size and scale. And they're obviously investing in the digital to make it less, take that human element out where they can. So they're freeing up their really valuable humans to do more value added things. So, I'll give you an example. If you're not, a lot of times an electrical distributor will be chasing down an order. Like, where is this coming from the manufacturer to the end point? I'm expediting a line item. Okay. Wesco's building digital tools that will allow the customer to know where it is. So their person at the location doesn't have to take a call from the customer saying, where is it? They probably know. They can look at their phone and know where it's going to arrive. Yep. That time they used to spend doing that, now they can put towards how can I make the customer better? How can I take cost out of their business? How can I really add value? And I think Wesco's doing a really good job of understanding that. They're taking things that used to be full service done by a human and now making them self-service. And I think every distributor in every channel's got to think that way. When you see your people at the desk, when they're taking an order from an email and swivel chairing over to the ERP and retyping it in, boy, figure out a way to automate that, right? Do something differently, because that is not value added time. All they're doing is entering an order you already have. So I think Wesco does a great job understanding that.
Well, wrapping up here, Wesco was the second in this new MDM case study series, and I hope a lot of our readers have already seen the newest iteration that dives into Ferguson, which will likewise have a formal report that we'll put in the MDM store. And I know you're already working on several other forthcoming case studies, though we'll stop shy of mentioning which companies those will be yet. We'll let our readers kind of see it when they're out there. But as a former employee at several distributors, like you mentioned, as well as here at MDM, and now as a consultant serving both distributor and manufacturing clients, what has this MDM case study series been like for you to really put on your detective hat and investigate the financials and the annual reports of these companies to extract the key things that they are doing to innovate and remain at the top of their markets?
Yeah, Mike, for me, it was fun, right? When you're a distributor leader, when you're a distributor executive, you're moving fast. You don't necessarily have time to keep up with what the competition is doing. I mean, you do the best you can, but you're running a business. So for me, it was a lot of fun, because as a former leader, I can look at it now with time, with, what are they doing that's differently, and really dive in and do it on a deep level. And every time I do this with you, it's fun, because you're profiling some of the best performers. And what we're finding, right, is no one does it the same way. Everybody does it a little bit different in how they attack it, what they think is important, where they're investing, what they're doing. And it just points out again that there's multiple ways to win in distribution. I mean, I've been in a long time with 5 or 6 of the biggest distributors in North America. Each one had their own culture. Each one had their own way of doing it. All 5 were amazingly successful. And I think that's a big part of our series, is proposing new ideas for you that you can think of. Hey, I kind of like what this person is doing, and grabbing 1 or 2 things out of what they're doing and thinking about, how do I bring that into my business? How can I improve? So it's really been a lot of fun, right, Mike, where we can kind of go, okay, here's 7 or 8 things to consider. And it's really gratifying to hear from distributors and manufacturers like, hey, I really like that. This one thing I'm going to take and put into my business. I think that's really good for the channel. I think it helps the whole channel. I once had a boss that said, a rising tide raises all boats. I think that's true. Everybody's got to compete for business. But I think if the channel gets better, the channel gets more profitable for everyone. What's your thoughts?
It's a great point. Everyone has the same goals of achieving profitability, better EBITDA, but like you said, there are many different ways for different distributors to achieve that. When we look at this entire industry and the wide spectrum that it covers and the demographics involved, from mom and pop distributors up to the Wescos and Fergusons and Grangers of the world, it's just a different situation for every distributor on there about how they want to attack their continuous improvement plan and what their ultimate goal, what success looks like for each of these companies. So that's, I think, what part of the purpose of these case studies is to help illustrate that there are different ways that you can achieve this, that like you mentioned here.
Yeah, Mike, I would just add one thing. I think you're doing a really good job of doing podcasts and interviews with smaller distributors who frankly are doing a lot of the same things and getting there in a different way. They're just not a publicly traded company we can write about a lot, right? And I think you've done a really good job of interviewing those small to medium distributors that are doing a lot of what we're covering in the series, but they've got their own twist on it, but they're highly successful. And I would encourage everyone to listen to those podcasts, because every time I do, I learn something.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks for those words. And like you said, some of these small to mid-sized distributors, not everyone wants that ultimate goal of achieving giant scale. Like, sure, there's some companies that they want to be a nationwide distributor and keep growing, but I think there's a lot of these small, mid-sized companies that they just they want to get better at what they're doing. They do want to become more profitable. They don't necessarily want to become bigger because they acknowledge that as you become bigger, there's more challenges, there's more things you have to deal with. Some want to stay relatively the size that they are, but they do want to become better, more efficient, and more profitable. So I think that's why these case studies are so fun to dig into, because they are a case by case basis when it comes to hearing the different stories each one has to tell. John, thanks again for joining the podcast.
Yep. Thanks, Mike. It was a lot of fun doing this one with you. Have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the MDM podcast. Like what you just heard? You can find all of our past episodes at mdm.com/podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And as a reminder, you can save 10% off of your Shift conference registration by using the code MDM podcast.